Let me do one more count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so we have Monique probably on the way. Luis will not be with us tonight. He's enjoying vacation this week, but we have Denise, who is more than capable to cover audit stuff in his stead. So time now, 7:03, I'm calling the meeting to order. You go ahead and share my screen. And, I need 2 screens. This is just a lot to do. Apologies while I navigate. And all right, where's my present button? There we go. All right. So here's what we have today. We're going to do opening items, public comment. I did not receive any request for public comment. We'll do the consent agenda. The PTCC report was in your packet. Was not planning to cover that orally unless there is something that needs to be emphasized. And I think I saw Michelle Long, we can ask her. And then we are doing abbreviated committee reports tonight because we want to spend the majority of our time on the school reopening committee report and recommendation. And they're asking for a board vote on some of their activities. Right now, I do not have any old or new business listed. And then we do have an executive session to discuss a personnel matter. I seem to have lost my window of people, so I need to do that. Hold on. All right, sorry, I am tired and not working on all cylinders here. 2% see my people. Now we're, sorry, I couldn't see anybody and I can't talk to an empty auditorium. That just doesn't work for me. All right, so board members and Christy, let's go ahead and do our popcorn vision, mission, and crest. I will start off as always. Vision, our vision here at the Globe Academy is to develop globally minded citizens who have the skills and attitudes to affect positive change. And like Chip was about to jump in.
Yeah, right when you muted me. Sorry, somebody else go. My dog is loud.
I can do it. Are we at the mission?
Yes.
The Globe Academy fosters global learning. Oh, my thing is in the way. Hold on. Global learning opportunities through balanced education for children of all backgrounds with a focus on dual language. Something is blocking my screen.
Ryan, your screen's really jumping around. There's only a bit showing, Ryan, and then just keep coming over it. Yeah.
But don't move anything. Just on dual language immersion and experiential learning model in a constructivist approach. Globe inspires students to be high-performing, lifelong learners equipped to make a positive impact in the world. Okay, now you can move again.
Is it still doing it?
No, not right now.
Yeah, it seems like you might be sharing slightly the wrong way. Try just stop sharing and just share just the one screen that you want to share.
Yep. Let me
It's still kind of cropped off though. You're sharing your whole desktop. It's kind of cropped.
All right, hold on. All right, let me try. Here we go. Let's see if this works. Oh, I wonder if I had it open in two windows and maybe I was looking at one that you weren't. Is that any better?
It's better. I think there's still some things that are hiding it, but I think it's a lot better.
There's, what's in front of it?
You're opening like floating windows up, and what it does, it doesn't show us your window, it just grays it out. So now it's totally.
All right. I guess I'm not going to be able to look at y'all until I stop sharing. All right. But for the good of the cause here. All right, let's move on and you keep letting me know if it's not working and we can pull out of it and go without it. All right, could I get someone to
I can do the next part.
Thank you.
The Globe Academy's core values are expressed in the acronym CREST: community, respect, empathy, sustainability, and trust. These values are expected of the governing board, faculty, staff, parents, and students. They are woven into daily life at Globe and incorporated into the curriculum.
Community. We are inclusive and we nurture and support one another.
Respect. We treat ourselves and others with kindness and dignity.
Empathy. We strive to understand and share the feelings of others.
Sustainability. We aim to conserve our resources for optimal use in the present and future.
Trust. We are committed to honesty, transparency, and respectfully sharing our thoughts and encouraging others to do the same.
Thank you. All right. I did not have any requests for public comment, so we're going to go on to the consent agenda. I do have an amendment to the agenda. If you all recall, originally we said that we were going to forego oral reports except for finance because we need to approve the minutes. And Abba with governance, she's starting a new little reminder series for us called Board Bites, which I think will be good. But I do want to add academic committee to do a brief presentation on MAP results. Since our next meeting is not until December 7th, we felt like that was just too long to wait, and Drew graciously kind of rushed to get the report together and get it through his committee. So I would like to amend the agenda to add academic committee doing an oral presentation. Any other amendments to the agenda other than that? All right, hearing none, consider all of that passed. And, oh, we do have PTCC report. Christy, did you drop that in?
I did not.
Oh,
I did.
I didn't see it in there earlier, but let's go ahead and do it.
We are that efficient.
That you got me. I thought I looked at it like an hour ago, so we're up to the minute.
Oh, well, excellent. I'll keep it short and to the point. So we are still looking for 2 volunteers. We are really looking for 2 volunteers. So please keep your ears and eyes open. We really need help. Our budget was passed, yay. So thank you for everyone who voted. The speaker series, and the mini grants application was sent out today, actually. So we're excited to hear what the teachers want to apply for. Speaker series, Drew, thank you so much. We had 17 people that participated in the Zoom, 7 that were watching live on Facebook. And so far we've had 155 views on the recorded session. So that's amazing. Thank you, Drew, for everything that you share with us. Next up, we have our 3 counselors, and that speaker series is this Thursday at 7:30. So they'll be sharing about social and emotional challenges with COVID and virtual learning. So we think that will bring a lot of value to the parents on how to continue to support our students. Upper Campus Book Fair, it was a 2-week-long virtual book fair. We finally got the numbers back from Scholastic. So it looks like the Scholastic rewards that the school gets is about $600, $597, which is 25% of the sales. Lower than in previous years, but we kind of expected a virtual book fair to not be as successful as in an in-person one. And we're looking forward to the lower campus one, which always brings more rewards than the upper campus. The scoreboard has been ordered for our gym. It's awesome. So it's in production now. So we're just waiting for it to arrive and installation. Lower campus teacher lounge renovation cabinets have been ordered. So as soon as they get in, the construction will start. We're very excited about that as well. International Fest, we feel it was a great success. The community really engaged and shared, and it was great to see everything that came across. The stories, the pictures, it was really fantastic. And we appreciate everybody's contributions for sure. And then we had a spirit night at Matthew's cafeteria that I think everybody enjoyed, the chicken fingers and the Southern food. And we have next up Meat Pizza Spirit Night on November 13th, the Lower Campus Book Fair, which I mentioned, and then we'll have another Spirit Night at Honey. We're trying to focus our Spirit Nights on Globe parent-owned businesses. So if you know of any parent-owned businesses, please let us know. We want to support our parent community as much as we can throughout this time. So that's it. Thank you so much, guys.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. I can think of a couple actually, so I'll try to write those down and get those to you.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, awesome.
I'm gonna jump off, but I'll keep watching outside the panelists. See you guys.
No problem. Thanks. All right, so we're gonna do committee reports. We'll do the board bylaws, then we'll move into academic, and then we will hear from our auditors, and then we will devote the most of tonight on the school reopening committee. So let's hop right to it. Abba, you're on.
All right. Hi, everybody. Good evening. I wanted to introduce to everyone the series. It's called Globe Bylaws Bite Series. And the goal of the series is to just educate our board on the bylaws and the governance of the board in bite sizes. So every meeting, the idea will be to introduce the key elements of the bylaws that are important for operations. So not every single term, but the ones that we would probably encounter on a regular basis. So this is the first in the series, and it will refresh, every meeting. So for the first one, we will focus on the board terms. Article 2, Section 2 of the bylaws talks about how the directors are nominated. So the new bylaws, we will be, the idea for transparency purposes is to nominate the board based on a succession planning during the annual meeting. And the annual meeting will normally be held at the end of the academic year, which is June. So everything is consistent. The initial terms of, excuse me, sorry for a second. The initial term of each director is a 3-year term. So that's the commitment for directors. And directors may serve up to 3 additional years, but no more than 6 consecutive years. And the preferred route to directorship is for committee members or for people to be active on committees for at least 6 months prior to becoming eligible for nomination to the board. So that's the first of the series. And we'll be focusing the next one on board training and so forth, and the qualifications for board members. And in line with that, if you guys could, the board members, if you guys could please forward to us a copy of your resumes, because we need to keep track of who our board members are, their skill sets and so forth. If you could send that to us by the next board meeting, that would be great. And I'll send out a reminder as well.
Thanks, Abba. Just to kind of add a little bit here, you all remember we passed our bylaws a couple of months ago, so they are fairly fresh to everyone, but these are the types of things that become stale if you don't use them. So Abba and her committee had this idea, which I think was a great one, to just kind of have very short little reminders of the key articles of the bylaws. I think it's also helpful for the community to see these because they're probably not in there digging through our bylaws on a regular basis, and it helps with just transparency and folks knowing you know, how we operate and how we govern. Another note on board goals for this year, if you'll remember in our retreat, we discussed job descriptions for the board and the committee chairs and all of the officers. Obby's committee is reviewing that in their next meeting, and we will be looking at that in December to get those approved as well. We do have short descriptions in the bylaws, but we're looking for something a little bit more robust and descriptive than what we currently have. And also the recruitment and nomination process for board of directors. We have a process. It has not always been followed. It's more of a recommended process in the bylaws and is not hard and fast. And we would like to operate a consistent process in the future. So that's another one of our board goals that you'll recall we discussed in the retreat. So kind of wanted to voice that over more for the community than for the board members, because I know you all were at the board retreat. All right, thanks, Abba. Let's go ahead and I'm gonna let Drew share his screen to talk about a couple slides on our map results.
Okay, can everybody see this? All right, I can't see everybody, but I'm gonna assume yes.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so this is just a kind of a quick review of our MAP scores based on the fall testing of MAP that was done remotely in September with the students returning back to school this fall. And a little bit of context before we dive into this is that last spring, as COVID was sort of going underway, NWEA released this report that was projecting what they were calling COVID-19 learning loss, which is that because a lot of schools closed mid-March, some of them did not, like Globe did, transition into an online format, and some just remained closed for the remainder of the year. That they anticipated some significant slides that you can kind of see here by closing in March and April versus closing in June for what you would typically see, during a summer learning loss. And so these COVID slide estimates suggested that students would return with roughly 70% of the learning gains in reading and 50% of the learning gains in math relative to a typical year. So those were pretty significant losses that were anticipated based on the projections from NWEA. And so with that in mind, we'll dive into our student growth summary for first the math scores. And I'll kind of walk through this a little bit so that we can take a look at all the numbers and kind of make sense of them all. The first thing is that you'll see there's 2 yellow bars and 2 blue bars. The 2 yellow bars reflect what was projected by MAP for each of the scores to be per grade level, and then what was observed. And then also the projected in 2019 and the observed. And you'll see we don't have kindergarten here because you can't project for kindergarten because it's their first time they've taken it. So we did 1st through 8th. And what we're seeing here are the reason why it's good to compare the 20 scores versus the 19 is because in 19, what we're seeing is what the scores were in 2018, then projected to 19. And then in the yellow ones, we're seeing the 2019 projected to 20. So we can see kind of what that growth looked like this year with COVID and then the previous year without. And what we see is a little bit of learning loss in math, but there are some good news. And for example, we saw in in 1st grade that the students actually exceeded projections in mathematics, but we do see a little bit of a drop kind of across the grade levels. A few places to note, and you'll see this in the next slide as well for reading, that in 2nd grade, because the test shifts from being read to the student having to read, that we've actually seen these, you'll see that this difference here between the projected and observed was very similar even without COVID. So that is a very expected score for our 2nd graders. So we do see a little bit of a drop in places like here in 4th and 5th grade where you might see a drop that's a little bit more significant than what was there before. But overall, much better than what NWEA was projecting on a national norms level with respect to how COVID was going to impact math learning. The results were even more promising in the reading scores, where we had, again, some COVID-19 learning loss, but a number of grades beat projections, including the first grade, third grade, and then 6, 7, and 8 were pretty much right on target there. And so some modest things that we need to pay attention to in the middle in a couple different places. But overall, I would say that given the challenges that COVID presented and what was projected by NWEA data, that this is overall really heartening news that students, by and large, continue to grow in their learning in both reading and math for NWEA. So for the MAP scores. So overall, mild learning loss is likely due to COVID-19 disruptions, but not as severe as predicted. And that is what we have for academic committee. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. There we go, so I can see everybody again. And return it back to you, Ryan.
Drew,
comments or questions?
the projected 20, the light yellow, was the with COVID impact or without?
I'll go back to sharing the screen again so I make sure I got it right.
Because you showed like the up and then the projected flat because of COVID. Was that?
Yeah, so in the yellow one here is you're referring to?
I can't see your screen. I mean,
Oh, sorry, I gotta share it again. My fault. Yeah, so in this one, the light yellow is what was projected and the darker yellow is what was actually observed.
but there's the projected, go back to slide 3.
Yes.
Is the projected the dotted line or the solid line?
The solid line.
So typically we would see growth through the last day of school, then we expect some slide back down, and but that projection is kind of saying, assuming no COVID, this is what we would have expected. Or is
Yeah,
it,
I mean, there was nothing that
They
I saw
never
on the
said that.
website that said that they would have that suggests that they would have changed their prediction models to account for COVID.
I
And what we
gotcha.
see here, at least, is that like when you look at the first grade, that the yellow bar and the blue bar are more or less the same for the projections in both 19 and 20. That those are really pretty close.
I see.
So unless they change their model in some way, which they may have, but I don't think that's the case because we would have seen a much more significant drop, that 50, 70% of those learning gains had they done that. So I was reading that as that it wasn't accounting for COVID.
Well, 20 is a little bit higher than 19, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps, and they could have, I guess it's possible that they could have made some adjustment there, but
Okay,
I'm not sure.
I understand.
I wonder if they took into account also that the way the test had to be administered this year was totally different from the way they had taken it in the past, and if that may have affected the scores also.
Yeah, I think that it's certainly possible that, there's a lot of things that were different this year between COVID and taking it at home and whatnot. But I think that for me, what I look at in the data and what I think is seeing, are the trends drastically different from what we saw 18-19 versus 19-20? And when you see a difference that's, a point or two on a RIT score, it's pretty modest. So I don't really look at the 1 or 2 point differences and draw any meaning from that year over year. I think that the places where you look for trends that you want to be paying attention to is when you see 4 and 5 and 6 point differences.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of the way I see it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Drew. Appreciate that. Any other questions from the board? Scanning. All right. Okay, you can go ahead and stop share. We're going to move on to Finance Committee. And Denise, do you want to start us off or do you want to hand it over to Doug?
I will start us off and then hand it over to Doug. So really all we're doing tonight, hopefully everybody received a copy of the draft audit report. There are some very minor changes that were made to the MD&A and, like page numbering and formatting. Doug can, there really wasn't anything major, I don't think, Doug. They were all very minor changes. So I guess if you have any questions, our auditor is here. The purpose is for you guys to approve the audit so that Doug can sign off and we can submit.
I'm happy to take, I'm happy to go through it with you, however you like.
There were no findings. There were no, it was a clean audit.
It's an audit with a qualified opinion, that's right. You know, the biggest question we always get a lot of times banks is, what's this TRS thing? Why does it make our financials look funny? But we've talked about that before, but if there's a question about that, I'm happy to go through the explanation. That's just something the state requires us to do, and the Governmental Accounting Standards Board requires us to do to show the long-term effects of being in the TRS plan.
And in the audit, for those of us who are, well, now I'm used to government accounting, but for those of us who are more used to corporate P&Ls, Doug always inserts at the last page something that looks more normal, more like a P&L if we were a corporation, and that strips out that distortion that TRS makes. So that's an obligation that we do not have to pay. We pay current on all our employer and employee contributions.
And it's got normal categories too, as opposed to functional cost. It has, you know, insurance, salaries, like those kind of categories. So it might be a little easier to follow.
I mean, I guess a couple of big numbers I'll just throw out in case you didn't notice them were, we spent, like, stripping out ECP, which kind of pays for aftercare. I'm sorry, I will try not to use lingo. Aftercare, which basically pays for itself, and interest, which is kind of beyond our control. Our total instructional expenses were 72% of expenses, and administrative and maintenance and operation plant was 28%. We also added about $700,000. That was our kind of government accounting profit. And so now our unrestricted fund balance is 1.7 million versus last year it was 372,000. No one has questions. This is great.
So, well, I was in the finance committee meeting and Luis couldn't be here tonight, but I just want to remind everyone, because I think a lot of folks don't have a finance background, but you know, the purpose of the audit is to really ensure that we're accurately accounting, like our books are accurate, and to also assess our internal controls and make sure that we don't have any gaps that might leave us open to some form of malfeasance or anything like that. So typically, you know, we have a good relationship with auditor, and they, know us, and they know our organization. And so, that's the main goal. They're not trying to make us more profitable or like do financial strategy or anything. They are merely like third party looking at how Denise and team are doing in being compliant with what we're expected to do. And so I think that's where, as a CFO, the badge of honor is to continually say, I had clean audits and no exceptions and no findings and no material weaknesses, because there are, they take a sampling of what we do and pull different transactions. They're not looking at every single thing that we do. And where you get exceptions and findings is if the process isn't followed. If you have a process and you have not followed it, or you don't have a thorough process that will, enable 2 check signers for large sums of money and things like that. So just to kind of in layman's terms lay out what we're looking for, and why it's like, I've been doing this a long time, but it's like 2 sentences at one board meeting that the audit's clean, and like we're doing cartwheels for that is what I'm trying to say, is that it's hard to do. It takes a ton of work. It's hours and hours of Denise working with auditors, in addition to all the stuff she does on the front end to make sure that, when she comes and says, no, we need to approve this at the board level because our policy says that we do this, like that's why we do it, is so that we prevent people from being able to get a $10,000 check without it coming to the board. And those are the types of things that the auditor is checking. So I don't have any questions. I did look at it. I was in the finance committee. I know Luis is happy and comfortable, and we discussed it at length. But I'd like to kind of put that out there again for the community to know, and for board members who just aren't as steeped in finance, that the committee is doing their job, and I've been in there with them on that. So
Hey, Ryan, I just wanted to say thanks to Denise, because it's not just that it's a lot of work this year. This is like years of getting to where this runs smoothly. And it didn't start that way at all. And so it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work to get here where it runs as smoothly as it seems like it runs. So it's a big deal, and it just comes from them doing a lot of the right work. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and I will now leave.
You can go.
I'll add to that too, that I have some schools that are still trying to figure out how to close their books, and the audit's due in 4 days. So, you've got a pretty system there, and some pretty knowledgeable people. So, it's a pleasure to do your audit compared to what I have to do.
We're as digital as we can be, which makes life easy.
Yes.
So I don't think I can put it up for approval. I think you guys have to do that.
Well, since Louise isn't here, I'm going to find out one more time, any questions on anything, and even if it isn't numbers related, process related, just anything for Doug. All right. In Louise's stead, since I was actually at the committee meeting, I'm going to go ahead and move that we approve the audit with any, do we anticipate any minor changes coming through between now and then? Are we done with?
I think we got it pretty much done, right, Doug?
Yeah, I don't have any, since the last draft I sent you, I don't have any other changes other than just a
I sent that to Kevin like 1 hour before this meeting, so I think the one they're approving is current.
Okay.
So I move that we approve the most recent audit that the board received today.
A second.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Unanimous, motion passes unanimously. Congratulations and thank you.
Hey, thank you, Doug.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, Denise. Bye, Doug. You can stick around, Doug, but you might have better things to do tonight.
I'm gonna see my kids, I think.
Yeah, that's a better thing for sure. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. We got through that in a little over a half hour. So, Christy, I'm going to now turn it over to you for the school reopening committee. And if you need some water or something, go grab it, because we're going to talk for a while and listen to some good hard work.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm actually really excited to be presenting this to you guys. And I'm going to share my screen in just a minute to get us started. But I just want to say that we have 66 people participating in this board meeting. I'm very excited about that. I know that everybody came to hear this announcement, but I'm also really excited that we have that much engagement. So I just wanted to put that out there. All right, here we go. Okay, again, I will need somebody to give me a thumbs up that you can see that. All right, thank you, Drew. Can still see it? Fabulous, yay. All right, so this is Globe Return to Campus recommendations from the reopening committee. And I just want to say off the bat that there is no one perfect right answer in any of this that we're experiencing. And we all know that, but we are having discussions looking at real true data to make the most informed, best decision we can. So I just want to put that out there with everything that you are going to hear about today, that we are looking at everything so we can make the best decision possible for staff, for students, and for families. So just keep that in mind as we move through this. Okay, I just want to remind everyone of our reopening committee and who it consisted of. We had board members, Katie, Drew, and then Anita was on the board. She is no longer on the board, but we kept her on due to her wonderful profession that she does. We thought that was very significant to what we were doing here. We also have our staff members. We felt it was very important that we had staff from both campuses, and also included English and language teachers. So that was important to us. The parents that we had are here listed below: Nicole, Yvonne, Laura, and Lauren. It was very important to us for parents, because we had a lot of people apply for each section of these of this committee. For the parents to have a cross section of where parents and families lived in DeKalb, that was important, and where their expertise could most help us in what we were trying to accomplish. So having epidemiologists, having professor at Emory, having an educator who has brought children into a school was just super, and having a doctor, it was just super important to us to have that expertise as we move forward. So just wanted to give a shout out to our board members, because they have worked really, our committee members, because they have worked really hard as we have moved through this process. And the actual team that's going to be presenting tonight is Drew, Katie, myself, Anita, and Nicole, and Lauren. But we do have Megan Tolbert, who is here from staff, in case anything comes up that she can add into, and also Marcia Hewitt and Katia Blunt, our heads of school, if they are needed as well. So I'm glad that they are here. So once we started meeting, we knew we needed to bring in some more staff members to our committee, and we knew we needed Denise, because we had to talk about money with some of the mitigation strategies and everything that we needed. We knew we needed to have our CFO there. We knew we needed our heads of school and assistant heads of school. And then both of our nurses and Jerry from facilities. We knew that they were important people to add to that committee. So one thing I just want to remind people, we are a locally approved charter school within DeKalb County Schools. This does allow us to make independent decisions that both support our academics and our operations, which is why we write a charter to become a charter school, to have some independence in how we run and what we teach. And so that's important to remember as we move through this process. Some of the factors that we wanted to consider as we are moving through this process, the three biggies were geography. What is happening around us with disease transmission? Not just DeKalb County, but also Metro Atlanta, and then the state of Georgia. So that was important to us. Academics, how can we best execute our dual language immersion model? That is, when you're talking about a school and doing virtual and doing hybrid or doing face-to-face, all of those seem fairly doable, but then you add dual language immersion on top of that, and it just adds another layer that we have a complexity to our model, but we believe in it and we want to stay true to that. Then we wanted to look at resources. Do we have the funds that we need to make sure we can execute this in the best and safest way? So wanted to give you that information. This committee we didn't just start September 22nd and say, here we are, we're going to start talking about this now. That is not what happened. So I just want to kind of remind everybody how long we've been doing this. Administration actually started talking about this on March 13th when all this hit. And we never stopped talking about it. But we really started talking about this semester particularly in May, when we realized there was a possibility we may not be able to re-enter the building come August. We have tried to engage both our staff and our parents through surveys, and I want you to know how much we appreciate you taking the time to do those surveys. They're not just out there living in la la land. We are reading them, we are taking them to heart, and we are looking and really disaggregating that data as we move forward. The board had many discussions about this in May, June, July. in particular, and also again in August and September. And this committee that I'm speaking of started its first meeting September 22nd. So we've been meeting for 5 weeks. And again, a big thank you to the committee because they put in a lot of hours to make this work. Our committee's charge, what we were charged to do. So when and how is what we were really charged to do. And the when is the earliest that Globe can come back into the building? When is it the safest? When is it right for our instruction? When is it right for staff? When is it right for students? So that was really important for us to do that. And when we started meeting in September, we knew we were looking at a November versus January. And the second thing is how should we reopen? Should we reopen all at once? Should it be gradual, staggered? If staggered, how do we implement it? Do we look at grades? Do we look at campuses? Do we look at languages, middle school versus elementary? So all those things have been in discussion. And then what mitigation strategies need to be in place to reopen? And you're going to hear a lot more about all of these as we move forward. So now we're going to talk about considerations and data and what we looked at. And I'm going to pass the baton to Anita as she takes over the next couple of slides.
Great, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So walking first through all of the factors we consider, I think Christy has outlined for the committee the path forward and the charge, and we started thinking through, well, how do we do this and what do we look at? The committee over the 5 weeks looked in detail at understanding what's happening from a local level transmission standpoint and what prevention measures we could actually put in place. We looked at current public health guidance coming from all ends, so CDC, Georgia, DeKalb County. The results from the staff and parent surveys as they came out were brought to the committee. What other schools are doing to have a handle on what's happening around us and what implementation and best practices were being taken into account. Also, impact on Globe's education experience and DLI model, and we'll talk through today how that's a little bit different and unique for us from an operations standpoint and what that means. Impact on Globe operations as a whole and how that gets broken down, and quite frankly, the calendar and what impacts that has. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So we'll walk through each of these bucket categories, and we want to make sure that we're sharing not the hours of conversation that we've all had in robust discussion, but at least the key level findings and how we looked at this. So as we looked through what was happening from a public health data standpoint, definitely monitoring what's happening on Georgia Department of Health website. On the website, they do have detailed information of what's happening in each county. They look at mortality, morbidity. They look at the hospitalizations rates. They also look at what the testing looks like and the results from that testing across communities. The other thing that's really great about this website is that you can actually monitor what's happening over time. So if you look at key areas and times where decisions happen, such as school starting, you start seeing the community impact on school starting and case counts increasing. You also start seeing DeKalb County may be red here, but a couple months later with us not opening and everyone else opening, you start seeing that overarching impact. We also looked at the guidance for school reopening. So if anyone's got a minute and wants to peruse the CDC website, what you'll find is a tremendous amount of information on there. Specifically, CDC has reopening guidance for schools that allows us to have a guide to help us think through this. Christy, do you want to click on that link? So we do want to hone in on this piece a little bit more. So this is a key document that schools across the country are using. It outlines the indicators that should be considered as core indicators. You can pick 1, 2, or all of these. It also outlines towards the bottom secondary indicators. The way that we can look at this is the core indicators are these like key items that are related to things like case counts over time, also looking at testing results and what that means within a given community.
Did you brush your teeth?
Sorry, I think Ava, you might be, okay, there you go. Okay, thanks. And then in addition, and most importantly, is mitigation factors. So none of these are looked at individually, is our kind of expert opinion. We really need to look at how do you take the combination of these potential factors and use them as, think of these as bumpers. Like what are the information that we have that we can use to help bumper our decision to understand what's happening in terms of disease. I want to focus on the top first, the core indicators. I think there's been a lot of focus on this case count of, okay, when we're under 100, we are going to open. What came out of our discussion is we did not feel like a point in time estimate and a single number would be something that could drive our operations. That number, you know, what's the difference between 99 and 102? So it becomes it's a metric that could be used, again, to inform the decision, but shouldn't be relied on solely as the decision factor. We also want to highlight this third column. This to many of us was the most important. What can we implement from a mitigation strategy standpoint? What can we do in terms of true core actions? And we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we'll talk in greater detail about all of the different buckets that we're looking at for factors that need to be fleshed out in order to ensure a safe reopening. If we can move to the secondary indicators, one of the other items I want to highlight, and I think there was a lot of robust discussion on, should we just be looking at numbers and exactly what's happening within our globe world, globe walls, globe families, or do we expand to understand the community impacts better? The biggest one here that signals if what's happening in the community is your impact on hospitals. So when we start looking across these indicators, we start getting a smarter sense of what's happening from an epidemiology and a disease standpoint. Can we go back to the slide deck, Christy? One of the other things to know, this document, this table is really used on the national scale. And so we are seeing schools across the country use it, and CDC is getting some of this information in, and it's beginning to post on websites as far as best practices. The last item from a public health and data standpoint for us to understand is the impact of flu season. Probably because this is part of my day job as far as influenza goes, but this is pretty key. So we don't know when flu season is going to hit, November to February. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of the impact it's going to have on the US. Flu season globally has not been a big deal, mainly because most countries have been shut down. People are hand washing and wearing masks, and that is just decreasing respiratory illness transmission. The symptoms do present similar to COVID. So there is this idea of, well, if somebody comes in for a temperature check, are you sending them home? You're sending them home for flu. Are we going to be shutting the school down if we start having increased number of what looks like cases, but really there's not? So there's that piece from an operations standpoint. But more importantly, if we have a bad flu season, which we don't know what's going to happen in the US because we did not shut down the way the rest of the world did, to the extent that the rest of the world did, but the impact on the healthcare resources. So not only if flu season ends up being bad, not only do we have COVID within our healthcare system during this potential second wave that we're in right now, we're also going to have normal flu, which already stresses the system if on a seasonal basis. So that's also part of our thinking. Next slide, please. Was this me still? This is me still, right? Yes, okay, sorry, we divvied this up. So in addition, again, case counts and looking at what's happening in the last 14 days with the CAB, we did see case counts going down. We are now on a national level seeing cases going up across the board. When we started the committee, we were, if you look at the chart, you'll see we were in a different spot. So we were very excited that everything was going down, and some of us had different positions on the committee when this started, and now we're at a different place. So this is the other piece here is over time, things will change. We have to be operating with the best information and most current information and data we can. Next slide. And I think I'm handing this one off to Drew. Is that right?
That's right. Christy, can we go back a slide, or is this the first one? Okay, sorry, we're good. Okay, so I'll share a little bit about some of the data that we were able to collect from both staff and teachers with respect to how staff teachers, and then also parents and families. So how was our community feeling about instruction models for this semester, particularly looking at the stretch of time between November and the end of the semester? And so I will share a couple of key takeaways here and then break down the data a little bit to share with everyone. Overall, what we see is that the vast majority of staff preferred to remain virtual for the fall semester. So 81% of staff indicated that virtual instruction was their first preference. So we saw a really strong consensus among the staff around remaining virtual. And that some actually had listed that as both their first and second choice, which was an interesting way to answer on the survey. We also we looked at to see if there was differences between upper and lower campus, and there was maybe a slightly preference higher for upper, but largely very similar across two campuses. There were no clear indication of differences on race and ethnicity for staff, and then when it came to the instructional model for when we had an eventual return, so we are looking at what that's going to look like, and continuing to survey teachers as we kind of get closer to that point. So we do have some factors that I think that teachers are considering with respect to what that model looks like, and we'll continue to update as we move forward from there. Can we go to the next slide? So when we asked the teachers to indicate their first preferences, we saw it was about 80% of teachers when you look them all together. This is broken down by looking at upper and lower campus separately. And we saw that strong preference for virtual learning on both campuses, and then a clear second was also hybrid learning for both. So that we see that kind of a common trend among most of the teachers and staff at Globe. So some key takeaways also from the parent survey. So that was the teachers, which was for between now and the end of this semester was a strong preference for remaining virtually. From the parent survey, what we saw is that a majority of parents would prefer to return in some form, whether that's doing a traditional 5-day everybody back or some type of hybrid model. But there are some differences by grade level and by parent race ethnicity, which we'll also discuss and kind of are things that this committee is looking at and taking very seriously. First off, when you look at grade level differences, families with younger students in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, things like that, were much more likely to indicate a preference for a 5-day return than those with older students. And families with older students are more likely to indicate a preference for hybrid. And there are probably a number of reasons why that might be the case, but certainly there was a preference among young families for having their students back in as much as possible. When it came to the question of returning, the majority would return. We asked the question, if we were to go back, would you return? And what would that look like? And what we did see was that a strong majority of parents would return, more so than indicated their preference. So we had a little more than half said that they would prefer to return in some form, but it was about 3/4 of Globe parents that said that they would return if that were the decision of the school. So at the same time, there was still a core number of parents and students who would remain virtual for the remainder of November and December, which is what came out in the data. And then what we did see is some differences by race ethnicity, where we saw white parents who identified as white were more likely to indicate comfort with returning compared to other groups. Christy, can you take it to the next slide? So when we see the breakdown by grades, here's where you see some of those differences. Largely, you don't see huge differences in the number who wanted to stay virtual. That was pretty consistent across the grade levels. But what you see between grades K through 1 and grades 6 through 8 is that the yellow and dark blue bars kind of flip, right? So in grades K through 1, it's the dark blue bar of a traditional 5-day model is a slight preference there. When you look at grades 6 through 8, there's a slight more preference for hybrid, reaching a little over that 30% indicator. So in the sense that about 40-ish some percent of families wanted to remain virtual across the board. But you see a little bit of that difference as we kind of discussed before. We also looked at race ethnicity differences here as well. And so we did see some differences when we looked at the question of race. So when we had white or Latino families or who indicated that on the survey had a desire to return in person or in hybrid, when we looked at Black families as well as families of other races, there was an actual preference over 50% referring to remain virtual. So we do see is that our community does have a little bit of differences across these indicators when looking at returning. And for those of you who filled out that survey, if you checked more than one box, you were counted kind of for both groups when we were looking at the data in that survey. So some differences here on race and ethnicity with respect to how people were responding, virtual versus hybrid, when looking at those 4 different groups.
Okay, so one of the things is, as Christy said, that was important for us to be cognizant of as a committee is what's going on around us. So as she said, you know, Globe, we have a charter that gives us some degree of flexibility or autonomy to act in what's in our best interest, but we are certainly cognizant of you know, what's going on in the communities around us and locally. So what kind of places were we looking at? Well, certainly DeKalb County. We also looked at Museum and Tapestry, which are charter schools in City of Decatur, Atlanta Public Schools, Cobb County, Gwinnett, Fulton, City of Decatur, and some private schools in the area. So what does that look like? We try to put a table together to compare, to just give a sense of comparison. DeKalb, there on the top line is, we've always tried to keep in mind DeKalb's calendar in how we look at, you know, start and stop dates. We recognize that sometimes Globe families have siblings who are in other DeKalb County schools. So we're aware of DeKalb always, but we're trying to make decisions that are best for us. DeKalb has changed a little bit from when this committee started meeting in terms of what they've said they were going to do, and then they've changed a little bit. But as it stands now, their current status is to remain virtual through the end of the calendar year, so through the end of the fall semester, with a TBD return date. The charter schools in Decatur, Museum and Tapestry, have announced that they are remaining virtual through the end of the calendar year or through the end of fall semester. And they're estimating a return in January of 21. Atlanta Public Schools, for their younger kids, their youngest kids, they're anticipating staying virtual through the fall semester with a January anticipated return or estimated return is what they're targeting. Their older students also staying virtual now, but with the TBD on the return date. Cobb County, as we know from the news, has just recently gone back to in-person learning for their younger students. That started as of a week ago, October 19th. They brought youngest students back in on a planned reentry. Their older students are anticipated to start back November the 5th. Fulton has recently started in-person learning. Gwinnett was fairly early on in doing in-person. City of Decatur has, for their very youngest learners and students with unique circumstances are in-person since last Monday. But the majority of them, pre-K, K, and then other grades phasing in are virtual with an anticipated start to in-person in the new year. St. Pius, a private school that's very close to us, which is a high school, 9th through 12th grades, they have resumed in-person learning as of recently. In Atlanta International School, grades 3 through 12, or I'm sorry, 3-year-old kindergarten through 12, they are on a hybrid, and they had a phased return in September. So we really were trying to look at all kinds of things around us, and as you can see, there are a variety of things, but in a number of the areas that are closest to us have had virtual learning to remain through the fall semester. Next slide.
So that brings us to the impact on Globe education experience and operations and calendar. We had a lot of discussion in this section as well. So one of the items that the staff that were part of the conversations highlighted is how long it takes kids to actually adjust. So we are a K-8 school and we see some variability across the board, but in general, we need at least 2 weeks in order to shift operations and get the children back up and running and into a routine and a rhythm in terms of being able to manage the shift of going from virtual to in school and some of the changes to the routines and schedules. In addition to that, that couples with the disruption to academic experience for our children and having to shift again from their routines and changing to having something that is either hybrid or shifting away from the virtual model. There's also consideration of staffing that is part of this decision too when we think through operationalizing a DOI model, understanding that our language teachers are limited and if what happens when we have staffing gaps if staff fall ill. So I think we've seen the data around children and the impact of COVID or lack of impact on children and what that means, but our staff are still being exposed in the situation. How do we ensure that we keep operations going and have additional staff that can be brought on as needed? Starting in November, we also looked at the fact from a shared calendar standpoint, this would be a very limited total education time that we would benefit from versus a January start. So when you factor in that we've got only a couple of weeks and then we break again for Thanksgiving and then we break again for Christmas and we've got this 2 week of adjustment period for the children, the calendar starts shrinking on us. The last item that really came up in discussion was the fact that we've got Thanksgiving gatherings. Thanksgiving's going to happen. We've got a break that happens then. We can't stop families from getting together and we can't control what happens during the Thanksgiving break. And so just the idea of additional COVID transmission risk coming on from the gatherings, just like we saw from July 4th and other periods of time, when people gather, we see an increase in COVID transmission rates. Next slide.
We're going to move into our key findings and the actual recommendations that we would like to bring forward to the board.
So in terms of key findings, what the committee has really focused conversation on is that although COVID cases in DeKalb were on the decline, they are now on the rise again. And we are very in tune with what the CDC estimates and their guide for what's necessary to have, like what sorts of essential prevention strategies need to be fleshed out and in place to ensure a safe return to in-person instruction. So we've been talking a great deal about a lot of these mitigation strategies and what can be implemented at Globe and what the timeline for that and the cost associated is. So that's what we're really underway with for assessment to determine the policies, the operational aspects and the funding details for these mitigation strategies and actions. And then in terms of a key finding for continuity of education, a November return really didn't make sense to us because you would come back in, have, teachers are telling us it takes 2 weeks, give or take, for students to adapt to that change. Then you have Thanksgiving break where there are likely to be family gatherings and things that could worsen spread or that we don't have much control of. And then we risk bringing that back into the building for a couple of weeks before winter break. So that just didn't really make a lot of sense to the committee. Given the need for at least 2 weeks for staff and students to transition and the breaks on the calendar, we thought that is not in our best interest for anyone. Next slide. So again, looking at what's going on around us, what the CDC recommendations are, the Department of Health, and what our families and staff are indicating as preferences, we've concluded that we want to give the time for additional preparations to ensure that we can have a safe return for students and for staff. And so that's really our big charge for what we're working on in the coming weeks and months. So we continue reviewing and analyzing data for most current information from the Georgia Department of Public Health and from the CDC to try to give us the best and most up-to-date information on return to in-person instruction in January. Next slide.
So the committee's recommendation is that pending favorable pandemic conditions and the capacity to ensure a safe return for staff and students, we propose that we continue virtual instruction until the end of fall semester and transition hybrid method of instruction throughout January. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means, but we wanted to make sure that families who wish to continue remotely would have a virtual option. So next slide. So just to sort of expand on that a little bit, over the next 2 months, we realized that we had to do a couple of things that were really important. If we started now, there would be a lot of things that may not be able to really get up to speed the way that we would need it to for us to return safely. So over the next 2 months, we'll be looking at pandemic conditions, and we'll also be looking at how we optimize our capacity as a school to ensure that we have safe returns. So looking at those mitigation factors and really ramping up all the factors that we need to have in place for people to come back. Some things we also want to make sure that we're clear on is that we're not proposing that when we come back in January that we'll come back in full capacity as we are used to being in school. So a 5-day instruction day in January is not what we're recommending, but rather we would come back as in a hybrid approach. And so there are many different models that the staff have been looking at and the committee's been looking at to try to figure out what the best model would be. And then these recommendations may be different between elementary school and middle school. We're really looking at it by grade and campus level. And then, you know, over this time, it'll give the committee enough time to reevaluate all of this data, really come up with what's the appropriate do in January. So the recommendation is that we will come back in January pending that all things look optimal from both a pandemic standpoint as well as a globe capacity standpoint. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about next steps and what you can expect. So one of the things I know, even as a parent, that we're really anxious about is, you know, what are some of the details? And, you know, when this whole discussion is over, we're not going to have all the answers that parents want, teachers want, and staff want, but we wanted to at least tell you what we knew for sure. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is prepare everyone, family and staff, that when we come back, it's not, the reality of coming back in a COVID environment is going to be very different. And so to really begin to wrap our minds around the fact that it won't be the same way as it was before. Decision to return to campus will require a community assessment again in January. So again, if for some reason that the committee decides that the pandemic is not optimal for return to school, then we will also make that assessment. But if everything is a go, one of the things we wanted to make sure is that we had a staggered start to school. So bring in some grades early and then stagger in the rest of the grades. We wanted to make sure that we are assessing all of the class sizes, making sure that we have enough students in the room so that we are appropriately doing social distancing. We want to make sure that our HVAC system is up to ASHRAE guidelines, and then also ensuring that we have the appropriate staffing ratios, not just for English, but also for language, as those numbers are different. And then regardless if you use an in-person plan or if you choose a virtual option, we want to make sure that to the best of our ability that we're being equitable, that everybody gets somewhat of a similar education. Really trying to figure out how we're going to implement an in-person and a virtual simultaneously or congruently. Those are our charges over the next few months. But we will know that those experiences will be different. Your experience if you're staying at home is going to be different than when you're at school. So just to be able to, you know, prepare ourselves for that difference. And then the all virtual curriculum will remain in place for the remainder of the academic year and afterwards. So once back, there will always be a virtual option. This is really important to our families that we really can't back in person and require people to come back. So want to make sure that that's communicated. Next slide. So one of the really, really big things, and I know we've talked a little bit about this, is the mitigation strategies that are going to allow us to come back. So one of the things that we realize is that January is not going to be this, you know, utopian time where COVID is magically gone. And so we know that COVID will still be in our communities. And the thing that is going to help us come back safely is going to be the type of mitigation strategies that we put in place on the Globe's campus. And so we want everyone to be, you know, well assured that this committee is really thinking about all of the mitigation strategies that are going to help you feel safe and help our kids feel safe and help our staff feel safe. So I just wanted to talk about a few of them, but there are absolutely more than this. So some things that we absolutely know for sure, that there will be a mask requirement. So this is not going to be an optional thing. So it's important that families are prepared for that. That we will be implementing hand hygiene, temperature checks, cohorting students, so putting students together so that they're not cross-contaminating with other students that aren't in their cohort, physical distancing. It's really important that our HVAC system is up to date. That is already underway. They are well aware of the ASHRAE guidelines, which are have been set nationally for HVAC systems and buildings as you return to school. So there's a full guidelines that's already been laid out, and our staff and facilities people are aware of that and following that. And then also health and safety communication. We want to make sure that all the families and staff are aware of, you know, how what the expectations are and how to implement those expectations. And then also cleaning and sanitation. We obviously need to make sure that we have all of the supplies that we need to ensure that our building is cleaned regularly and that our kids have access to clean rooms and our staff have access to clean rooms. To do this, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of time between now and January. And so we as a committee have broken up into smaller groups. So we have a policies and procedure group that really is going to help outline all of the recommendations for both staff and for parents. Abilities that's the group that's going to look at how we in our build. Instructional models, the teachers and staff are already deciding what is going to work optimally for both teachers and students for the instruction models for both in-person and virtual communications. As we need, everybody really wants on. We're going to be working diligently to make sure that we're communicating things effectively. And then after we've kind of done all of that, then we pull all that together and bring it to our finance and budgeting committee, who's going to make sure that we have the funds to do that. So when we look at all of this in totality, it's important that we have all of these things in place before we even think about reopening the school, which is another reason why our recommendation is for January. Next slide.
All right, thank you, Nicole. So we wanted to share with you the things that we knew at the outset, but we also wanted to share with you some of the things that we don't know and what information is coming. So you can expect to hear, you know, as we move along, what the exact date of return to in-person instruction might be, how many in-person spots are available and how those will be allocated. We have to take a look at what interest level there is, what space is available, and then think about the needs that different children might have, and it's all very complicated. Thinking about those pandemic and operational factors that would prevent us from returning. So this is one small bullet here, but there's a lot that goes into this. Thinking about, you know, the transmission in the area, and then whether or not we're able to institute all of those mitigation factors that Nicole was talking about. For more information, specifics about those mitigation strategies, I know many of you are concerned about what those might be, and we want to make sure that we give you the best details that we can. So all that information is coming. And then about the instructional model, what the hybrid model will look like, and the potential for differences by grade level as well. So this is our plan for our tentative communication timeline. You'll see beginning very soon, this week or next, there will be a new segment in the weekly newsletter called the COVID Corner, where we will be sharing regular updates with the Globe community. There will be a link to a survey for you to submit questions that you have, and especially over the coming weeks as documents are being prepared, those handbooks, you'll be able to submit your questions, and we'll populate that segment with the answers to those questions. And so
We really encourage you to use that. That will help inform us to know what questions you have and to make sure that we address those. So please be on the lookout for that. We'll be sending out new surveys for staff and parents. So if, we've seen nothing throughout this whole process. This is a really dynamic situation. Things are changing quickly. Our opinions are changing quickly. As I think Anita said, some folks on the committee felt one way when we began, and then things started to shift as we watched the numbers change. And so as our interpretation of the situation is changing, we know that your comfort levels may be changing as well. And so it's important that we gather updated information. So we do appreciate your response to those surveys because that really informs what we're doing. And like has been said before, we really rely heavily on that. So please keep it up. We'll be preparing reopening handbooks for both staff and parents. Parents will be able to submit decision for instruction for their children, as well as staff's decision for instruction. And then there will be lots of welcome back and reentry reminders as we move forward. So you'll be hearing from us, I guess is the bottom line here.
All right, thank you, Lauren. And that leads us to our last slide for tonight. And that's, we started with our committee's charge like at the beginning, and here is our charge going forward. So looking at January, our GLOBE plans to return in January pending disease progression. This is really, really important. And we wanted you to know that we take that seriously. And then how we should reopen, we're going to be meeting with all of this in our forefront. So given all the factors presented, we will continue to meet and really figure out how we're going to reopen operationally, academically, and with our facility. So that is the end of our presentation. So I am going to stop sharing and bring us all back together so we can have a time to talk through all this and answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Christy and everyone. Appreciate that. I know you guys worked hard with the committee and on putting that presentation together and distilling all the information you had. I saw a couple of versions and it just got better and better every day. So that was a lot. And I wanted to jump in because I want to separate, I don't want to have a free-for-all discussion. I want to separate it into two issues. I want to first field questions for the committee on their recommendation to remain virtual between now and January before we get into a lot of questions about the how and what it might look like when we go back, because that's really the primary decision tonight that they're asking for, is a vote and an endorsement from the board to agree with their recommendation that we remain virtual through the remainder of the calendar year. Am I restating the request accurately, Christy, for what the committee is asking us to vote on?
Yes, so it will be the when we return, exactly.
Okay. So
and I think it was through the fall semester.
Correct, that we will remain virtual until the end of fall semester for sure.
Which ends when?
Well, the grading period for fall semester actually ends the week before MLK weekend.
Okay.
So we have not decided as a committee what our recommendation will be when we actually enter the building in January, but we are looking at a January return.
So early MLK week?
Possibly. This is where we got into the nitty gritty, and you'll probably will want to separate this out, but this is where we got into the nitty gritty of when we talked about that this will be phased in, and then we are looking at different start dates for by grade level, campus, elementary, middle school.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the ask is clear for the board. So is the ask that we will remain fully virtual through the end of the calendar year?
Yes.
Because we may come back early January, pilot, phase in, hybrid, like you want the flexibility. The goal is to do it as early as possible and as early as possible would be early January. So you're not, because it's a different ask than to say,
Yes, you are correct.
to remain fully virtual through MLK. That's 3 weeks. more.
Correct. We're going to stay fully virtual to the end of this calendar year, but how people will return will look differently when we come back in January. I just want that expectation out there. We don't want.
It's a no earlier than request. Return no earlier than January.
Correct. Perfect.
Okay. So with that, I think now questions from the board.
I have a question.
Yep.
November's obviously 30 days, starts in a week. What, if you were saying start in November, if it's choice A, choice B, how many days of school are there between now and when school would have broken up, as we call it in England, but stopped for Christmas or the holidays? Obviously, you've got a few days off over Thanksgiving, but otherwise it's pretty well every school day until December 15th or something.
It's roughly around 30 days.
About 30 days. So 6 weeks.
But I think that's where the distinction that Ryan and Christy, and I'm not sure if I understood where we landed, the distinction between saying the end of the calendar year versus the end of the fall semester. And I think it was Lauren that was clarifying the at least virtual through at least the end of the fall semester, which is around MLK week in January. But then I thought Christy is saying, well, at least through the end of the calendar year, which is Christmas time, the holidays, and then there may be some kind of phasing in starting when we return in January, which is what, the 5th, versus the beginning of the fall or the spring semester, which would be after MLK week. So I don't know, maybe everyone else caught it but me, but I don't have an appreciation of the asks still.
It's calendar. So count the earliest possible that we could begin to let kids back into the building is the January date.
Where in January?
So,
January MLK or January when we return?
No. January when we return. So the January 5th-ish,
Okay,
whatever that
so-
date exactly was.
So through the end of the calendar year is the ask. Virtual
Yeah.
through the end of the calendar year.
And
Correct.
then
The
after
second,
that.
the second,
Okay, thank you.
the second part of your question starts getting into the how factors, which is a whole other can of worms.
Right, I get that, but the how can't happen until we're no longer completely virtual. So the ask for today is just completely virtual, and then how to not be completely virtual. But when are we going to start talking about that? Is that something we're going to start working on? Not working on, but something we're going to start phasing, possibly January after the holidays or January after MLK weekend. And it sounds like we're saying January 5th-ish, whenever we come back after the holidays, no earlier than that, but that makes sense to me that way.
Yes. And the reason why it was somewhat vague on the exact start date is because we want to make sure we're looking at all the data as we come back. We give staff time to acclimate back into the building and get their classrooms ready, and we phase people back in. So if you happen to be in a group that doesn't come back on January 5th, we want to set the expectations that not everybody's coming into the building all at one time. You're on mute, Monique. Monique, you're on mute.
No, it was fine. I knew, but I was saying that's understandable. When we're doing it, the question was just when would the phasing start? The phasing would start early January versus after the end of the fall semester, possibly.
Yeah, I think that that's why I was using the no earlier than. So, and I think what caused some of the ambiguity is that Christy and committee are saying the earliest we would come back, anybody would come back, would be the 5th. It's highly unlikely that you would bring a lot of people back on the 5th, but you might. And so she's just saying that the January period, our goal would be to phase students into the building. We don't yet know how, we don't yet know what grades, we don't yet know, like we need to keep collecting data and come back with more answers there. And so she's just, from my discussions with her, and again, I want the committee to make sure they're clear about it. I don't want to speak for you, but my understanding is that our goal tonight is to give some clarity and predictability to staff and parents so that they can say, okay, I know what the next 6 weeks looks like. And I know to tune in on December 7th at the next board meeting because I'm going to get more information. And I know to read my email and weekly reminders all during December so that I understand what the plan is and I can take my surveys and all of that. So we're still going to be pushing heavy data collection and information, but I think this is the first kind of attempt to say, let's give people some predictability to drive on with their lives for 2 more months, and then let's push hard to open as soon as we can, as safely as we can.
One thing, obviously you've all done excellent work with far more in-depth conversation than me as a dad sitting at home talking to my wife or something. The survey seems to say that a lot of parents want to go back in some way. I'm actually not one of those, but everyone has their different needs, and you hear about parents having mental health issues and losing jobs and having problems and everything else. And I think that while we're going to talk about the how in January, to make an informed decision of the when, I just feel like us not doing any, is there just nothing we can do between now and January to try and ease some strains on these families that we are here to serve as well? Whether we can help organize micro classes or something, us just saying, see you all in January, we'll let you know how they're going to do it. That seems a little bit not hearing our audience when I've seen the results saying a lot would want to come back because they've obviously got other pressures that we may not have as a group. Maybe they do have the pressure. Maybe we've got a good cross-reference here. But what that's the hard thing I'm having by saying January sounds like the great idea.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that. One of the things that we've had a lot of conversations about very intently is the issue of equity and what that looks like for our families that have been struggling since August to try to make this work. And also the equity lens of what is that going to look like when there are going to be families who are going to have to stay at home because of health reasons. And but then also when we start back in hybrid, what does that look like? And then we also look at staff and the equity of staff and making sure that we're keeping our staff safe as well. So those are all discussions that we are having. And that is one reason why we really enlisted the help from Heidi and Kathy, Heidi Powell being our ECP director, to almost if you want to call it a pilot, to look at how we can bring a very small group of people into the building and what our mitigation strategies are looking like in that aspect. So that option is still going to be there. But we just don't, with our mitigation strategies and looking at our numbers currently and with gatherings happening very, very soon, we don't think it's safe to make that option available right now.
Okay. So one of the concerns is by appeasing some parents, you may alienate your staff and end up not having the staff because they don't want it. I mean, it was 83% or something from memory that didn't want to go back. So it was an incredibly high number of staff that did not want to expose themselves to risk or inconvenience or whatever it may be of returning. I'm sure that if I asked my staff the same, it would be 100%. So it doesn't surprise me that would probably be the answer. But I don't know. It just seems a little bit all or nothing. And we've been dealing with this pandemic, all of us, since March. And so it feels like we could have possibly, and no point looking at water under the bridge, but moving forward, it would be great to think of some things look, what happens if January pushes to February or February pushes to March? We're trying to put a line in the sand now, but the either or with nothing in the middle just seems just a little bit binary.
I do want to address one thing you said, Jonathan, and then I'll let somebody else jump in. Please feel free to do so. But it wasn't about appeasing staff or appeasing parents. It wasn't about that, our discussions. Our discussions really were to look at the data, look at what's happening around us, and how can we bring everyone back safely. Mm-hmm. That is our main concern. And the safety and well-being emotionally and mentally of our staff and the social emotional well-being of our students, like really looking at those two factors of how we're going to do this.
I think the one additional piece to add to that, Christy, is there's like, at the end of the day, like our charter denotes that we have to do things from an academic standpoint, and we have to be able to execute that mission, and we are held to that, and that is the doctrine in which Globe has to survive under. I totally agree with the fact that every school is a core component of a community, and during a pandemic is when you're going to be relying on resources like schools and these communities to come together to help figure things out. We are not going to make everyone happy. We're not going to be able to appease every situation, and that's part of the challenge. We are a diverse community, and that's part of why people like to be at Globe. But with that comes challenges, especially at times like this, to try to find an approach that meets everyone's needs. What we've talked through is buckets and options. Knowing that all the options will not be equal is really important for people to understand. We're also a community of expectations. Having been here from the beginning, we hold ourselves to expectations, and we have checks and balances with our stakeholders that hold us to that. This isn't going to be the same. Like, this year as a whole is a challenge globally, let alone nationally or within DeKalb or within our small Globe community. So we've got like, kudos to Christy to pull together a team that is extremely thoughtful and diverse in the thinking. Like, when you hear these conversations that the group is having, it is considering as many angles as possible. And I've always been coming back to like the level of expectations that you have for this year and what you've known as normal. There is nothing normal about this calendar year, and there's nothing normal about this academic year. So whatever this part of this discussion today is for us to be very frank and level set expectations with everybody, whether it's board or the folks listening into this. This is hard. This is not going to be what we thought this school year was going to be.
I think lastly, the point I'll bring up is that we have to be able to do this safely. So regardless if there are 10 people in the room or if there are 100 people in the room, each one of those people needs to be safe. And so more importantly, you know, it's not just about, we understand, I mean, this has been a struggle for every single parent. It's been a struggle for me. But I also know that if I don't feel comfortable bringing my kids in there, I wouldn't want to put another family or a staff member at risk. And so although all of these things are in the works and really trying to optimize, we really need to be in a very good position to make sure that we can have people in a building safely when we're in the middle and the uptick of a pandemic. So I don't think it's just about, you know, trying to appease anybody. It's about making sure people are safe.
I'm going to go back and say, look, I'm one of the ones that would say, keep my kids away from it. I'm from England. I've got no support network here at all. The last thing I want to do is get sick. But I realise that I'm not the majority either. And look, Anita, with your insights, maybe educate, why can our neighbours in other counties go back? Is it they have lower infection rates or lower standards for not having the 100 per 100,000 infection rate? Why can you look around, there's other people going back and then we can't?
I think it's a what level of risk are you willing to take? And so, okay, let's look at the private schools around us, right? The private schools have a different operational capacity. That right there sets them apart. They have space, they have rooms, they have teachers they can fund, they have backup staffing plans, they have resources that we don't have. So if we had a better building with a better ventilation system plus triple the space, we could probably come back. So I think this is a balance of, I'm not wedded to the community, what's happening in the community and disease rates as being the fundamental open, don't open. You can open with high disease if you've got strong operational capacity. And that's where the balance is. Like, this is why, like, I'm heavily against the approach that DeKalb has taken of like using a number. You can't use a number. The number is supposed to be a bumper. It's supposed to be one variable in the larger decision-making process. So if you have, on the flip end, you could have no disease and illness happening, and you can have very weak operations. And we've seen this in rural Georgia. Like, we've seen schools in rural Georgia all of a sudden have an outbreak. They should not have had an outbreak, but they also weren't wearing masks. They weren't doing temperature checks. They didn't have spacing in classrooms. They had the room. So that's like, we totally saw that at Woodstock coming. They opened up and they shut down schools like almost immediately. New York City is up and down, up and down. Like, they are there's so many factors. It's a matter of, we get to control our open close as part of our charter. So it's this, you know, we tend to follow when it's like the snow stuff happens, right? Like, we leverage the fact that Christy used this example the other day. The cab bus drivers go and they check out the roads to make sure if it's safe or not. And so we follow them for closures. We get to make our own decisions here.
No, I think that's great education for everyone that isn't part of your committee. I mean, it's just, you know, just good stuff for people to hear and understand.
So,
and it's hard. It's very complicated too.
Anita, to follow up kind of on what you were saying, my question, and it ties into what you're saying now. There was a slide that you showed that talked about what we know, and then kind of what we don't know, what we're going to develop later. And so it was conversation about what it would look like when we came back, and you know, the HVAC and protocols and things that would be put in place. And I can imagine that there will be questions about, well, why haven't we already talked about or done or forged a way ahead with those things that would maybe work towards making sure that strategically or operationally we are in a position to open up, even though the numbers are doing what they're doing? Like, what do we need as a community to operate like, you know, like a private school per se? If, you know, it's a, hey, have you asked us for some money? Is it money? You know, can we pay? Because I'll pay to send my kid back. Like, how much do we need to buy? Like, what, you know, an HVAC system, what does that cost? Or are the numbers, no matter what, just, so I wanted to, I was going to pose the same question a different way before you just made that last comment, because I could imagine, based off of some comments I've heard before, there's the questions or the comments being made that, well, heck, we've been in this since March. Some of those things, you know, could have already been worked out. Like, what does the cleaning plan look like? What is, you know, what do we need in the building? What kind of protocols? Once we all came to the agreement that we at least need masks, like, have we started stocking up on masks? Because, you know, we didn't need masks for like 6 months, you know, they don't work, but now they work. So, you know, like, can we stock up on masks? Can we make sure that they're in place? What are we doing as a school to control the things we can control where we can't control the numbers? And I thought before your comment that it was like, yeah, you can do all those things, but if, you know, outside is hot, you know, you can't, we need to not bring our kids together because there's not much we can do, but perhaps there is more we can do as a community, and maybe redirect some resources to making sure that we're able to, you know, function a little on a higher level, or maybe address some of those other concerns.
So Globe Trap's gonna get us a whole new building, right, Megan?
Oh, don't say that.
But that's what we would need to share, like, with our community, is let them know that no, it's not a little, don't bring your fans to the building. It's not your pure air purifiers. You know, an HVAC is this, you know, I don't know, you know, but making sure that they understand that, because I have seen, okay, so we're going to start working on this now. You know, we should have had that in place since March. And I know that that's not, I mean, I'm certainly playing devil's advocate with this question because I know the answer to it, but I think it needs to be kind of said out loud so that people know that we're not waiting to start planning something we do already.
All of these things, a lot of these things have been part of our plans since May, actually since March. Once we got past the crisis mode, we have all, you know, the HVAC stuff is already in process. There are a lot of things in process. Instructionally, we have been researching and talking to people in other schools about the hybrid models, about how it works. It's new to everybody. Nobody knows how to fix it all, but we are we're not sitting around and saying, oh, in January, we'll decide what we're going to do. No, we're already making those decisions and doing things now.
And there's the list of items on the CDC indicators list, right? And it gives you an idea of if you can do these 5 things. Like, we're not starting at basics, like the team's already taking care of, and administration, like all the planning they've done since March, has already taken care of having the supplies that we need for masks and face shields, and all of those things are in place. What we're saying is we've got these committees now set up. We've got another month or so. What else can we comb through everything? Did we forget anything? Can we enhance anything? Can we make the plan even more stronger so that if disease looks a little different, maybe we've got some additional options? But I don't want to downplay disease. Don't get me wrong. The person from CDC is not downplaying disease illness, right? Like, that is a huge factor, but we still have to operationalize everything. Sorry, Christy, I think I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. You and Marcia covered it. Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing that I will comment on here is I think the 2 bigger factors are the actual logistics and what our restrictions are. Like, we have unique limitations because of our academic model that other schools don't have, right? We can't plug and play. We can't loop a 3rd and 4th grade with the same teacher and combine those classes because that teacher is comfortable coming back and someone else wants to stay virtual. You know, we just have physical restrictions, and what the teachers are doing with their classes is different than what a typical school is doing. So I think that that's probably more of what I would ask you all to bring back in December, because I know I've talked to Drew about it. I've talked to Christy about it. We've brainstormed different ways to do like a hybrid model, for instance. But it becomes, you have to measure kind of how much you're taxing your teachers as well. So if you get them used to a new model, which is online, virtual 100%, and they've been doing it now for 8-10 weeks, and then you say, oh, hey, we're switching in 2 weeks, let's hurry up and figure out a hybrid model, and oh, we're going to be full-time in a month. Like, there's some switching costs that we need to also consider, and I can't even imagine. I talked to somebody today who was saying they had my doctor ENT for my daughter was saying his daughter teaches in California, and she's teaching online and kids in class at the same time. And he was just talking about the huge challenges and how hard that is for her. And then imagine having your own children on top of that. So, there's other considerations other than even, other than just the logistics, the instructional model. There's just also the human capacity and what we're asking of our people. And parents are feeling it, we're feeling it, but teachers are too. And I think we need to remember that as well.
Hey, Ryan, on that note, I easily could have missed this or not looked for it because it didn't necessarily apply to me, but my kids are doing great and they're thriving in this environment. But I know that there's a ton of kids and parents and teachers that aren't, that this is really, really difficult for whatever their specific reason. Are we doing something where we're actively giving those resources to the parents or to the kids or to the teachers and saying, hey, if this is what you're struggling with, here's the steps to work through this, or here's who to talk to at the school, or and we easily could be doing that every week. And I skip that part of an email because it doesn't apply to me, but it's just something that as we're working through this, everyone's having a different experience. And I think one thing that we could be doing as a school is, how do we give the most resources to help the people that need it? Not just the ones that have a specific education plan or those, it's all of these kids are struggling in different ways. And are we doing something actively, not to add more work to all the stuff that y'all are already doing?
We are every day. Every
Okay,
day,
good.
teachers and teachers' aides are reaching out to parents, to reaching out to kids, having one-on-ones with kids. There's a lot of stuff going on to try to help kids be engaged. And really, if you look at some of the statistics about virtual attendance, even in classes, it hovers around 40–50%. We have 80–90% of our kids who are engaged, and lots of people reaching out to help those who are struggling.
I assumed we were doing an awesome job. It just didn't apply to me, so I haven't had an opportunity to look through it. And so I just wanted to just make sure that it was brought up, but I assumed it seems like everything is just going amazingly well. So thank you again.
Chip, I will mention, and I know that we have plenty to cover, but I did briefly cover it in my report. Kind of that was one of my questions, just always from an equity standpoint. But Judy and Katia both gave a very in-depth explanation of kind of how they've pivoted more recently to address kids that are that are struggling or showing kind of some of the risk factors in attendance and poor performance or just different. And it wasn't the kids who, like you're saying, who may already have services, who may already be on the radar. It was just kind of something looks a little different and we're doing a lot more. And I actually was very surprised to hear about it and the level of work. Like they have a little team that they put together, that they are, reaching out to parents individually and creating a plan for like these particular children that are not, maybe are not attending class or not turning in their work, or just that there's something off about. And one of my recommendations actually to Judy and Katia both was to make sure, and it's almost like those people like you and I, just in this particular instance, who may not necessarily have a kid that's struggling, we often are the ones that are also speaking up for the kids who may be somewhere struggling, but we don't know because
Right.
you're not, their parents. And so sometimes that also means that we don't know the resources that are out there for the kids that are struggling because they're not for us. And
Right.
so in this particular instance, and my kid, one of my children has an IEP. I put her business out there. I know that's private. But one of my kids did, so I know what that looks like. But I also, wouldn't know for my other son, what's going on in his classroom. And so just kind of to our parents, where a lot of times we do get questions about what about those kids? What about these kids? And it always turns out that a lot of times the person that's raising the question, it's not really their kid, where we're empathetic, and that's part of CREST, and we're supposed to be concerned, and everything should be done with the equitable lens. But sometimes that also means that we're just not privy to the latest and greatest that's going on at the school because we're not in the need and therefore not in the know. So
Right.
I did ask that some of those things be shared because I feel like, one, those of us who are not in the need and not in the know, therefore, we can be in the know, but also maybe if there's a kid that slipped through the cracks on this wonderful new, way of reaching out that may not hit the radar, then the parent who wants the resource would know that it's available. I know that you guys are doing a lot of work in identifying the kids, and therefore there shouldn't be any that you haven't identified, but maybe there's someone that may be struggling to look like they're doing so well, and maybe they're just not. And because they don't know about all these extra resources, they just are not reaching out. And so that is something that I spoke with Judy and Katia about, and they were both, and Christy, but they were both all very receptive of that. And so trying to make sure that newer initiative, it hasn't been going on the whole school year, but that newer initiative is somehow shared so that people can kind of tap into that resource. So they're working on
Good.
it.
Awesome.
And also just a shameless plug for our counselor evening talk Thursday night. They'll be doing that, which will have lots of touch points and resources and ways to plug in.
Great.
All right. Other questions about trying to focus on the rest of this semester from most folks, but another
So
opportunity.
one more general comment just for awareness. I think there's quite a bit of like general angst that we're seeing on the CDC side from schools closing, reopening, closing, reopening about how is this year going to impact across the board as far as next year when kids go to the next grade, are they going to be ready for it? So that just so folks know, that's not a globe problem, that's a national issue that is brewing up in multiple areas. So it recognizes a parent that you want your kid not to lose a year, and how are they going to be with other, you see these other schools that are opening, and are we going to be able to keep up? Like there's going to have to be like national education level decisions, educational levels on the national level, that education decisions on a national level that are going to have to be considered just given the impact on academics that this year has had across the board. So that is happening on the national level. We don't have answers yet, but that's flagged way up high. So.
All right.
Hey, Brian, just one more quick thing. I just want to thank the board for your questions and listening intently and really having the best interest of our staff and our students at the forefront as we move forward. I really appreciate that. And I cannot thank this committee enough for all their tireless hours that they have put into this. So I just want to say thank you on all fronts. I really appreciate it.
So do we feel equipped to take the vote that the committee is asking for, and then we can still have follow-on discussion? And I think we should have some discussion about what we would like to see in the next board meeting to help them kind of focus some of their work. But does anybody have any more questions before they feel equipped to take the vote? Okay. Could I ask one of the board members who is on the committee to make that motion so that we make sure we are articulating it accurately? Or do you want me to take a stab at it? Drew or Katie?
I guess I'll take a stab at it. Is that right? Try. I'd like to make a motion that the board approve the committee's recommendation to open no earlier than December 31st, 2020.
What's our first day back is January 5th.
Sorry, January 5th, 2021.
Right?
I want to make sure I had the date right, but.
No, I gotcha. We do these, work in progress motions so that we make sure we get it right. It's a team effort. Christy, I'm also looking at you to make sure the calendar date is right. You can't see I'm looking at you, but I am.
Okay, thank you.
All right, to put it all in one sentence, I make a motion that the board accept the recommendation of the committee to open no earlier than January 5th, 2021.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All abstaining? Jonathan is abstaining. All right, one abstention. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. I know you do this every time, Kevin, but please make sure you capture the chat because I see a lot of good questions and input in there. All right. So I think I want to turn our attention for a little bit here to kind of our work now between now and December 7th and what we would like to hear from the committee. So I'm going to open up the floor for board members to comment on that or reiterate things they've already said.
Hey, Ryan, would it be better if I kind of gave you an idea of what we're thinking and then that we can expand from that?
Sure. I felt like you gave us an idea.
Yeah. I just wanted to
if you want to review it again, that's fine.
Perfect. So what we're planning on November, doing some more surveys to get information. I did see something in the chat that said we need to see the plan before we can answer the survey, but the survey in November is more about seeing where you are with safety and reentry before the plan. That will help guide us, have a little bit more information. In December, at the December board meeting, we want to go ahead and present protocols and procedures, a handbook for parents and a handbook for staff for re-entry in January. And then at that point, we want to ask parents to make a decision based on the information you get from the handbook. So that's kind of where we are. And then we can, I would love to hear anything else you are thinking or that is in your mind as we move forward.
So a thought I had as I was listening to some of the questions is, I wonder if we can figure out a way to kind of graphically depict the different buckets of readiness. So, you know, we've talked about academics, we've talked about logistics, we've talked about human capital, we've talked about kind of budget and where we are with that. We've talked about the facility readiness, space requirements. So I wonder if we can find a way to kind of quantify some of those and also identify our restrictions. Like we can fit no more than this many students safely in a building or something like that. Because what I anticipate happening, which I think this is what I see at work here, is that we're balancing what people are saying they feel safe doing, what they're willing to do, and we're trying to accommodate that. And we're matching that up against our own set of constraints. And our goal is, and our hope is that our constraints don't limit what we hear over here. So if we have 50% that want to come in person and 50% don't, we're like, hey, the math works. We can accommodate 50%. And so we can move forward with hybrid or in person because 50% are going to stay virtual the rest of the year. Now let's plan for a 50-50 split as safely as possible, as soon as possible, because our constraints are matching. Because if the constraints don't match, then that's a bigger challenge. If 80% want to come back and we only feel like we can accommodate 50% safely, then that's a whole nother set of how do we manage that? What's that look like? You know, then do we go hybrid and not full-time because of the constraints, not because we don't think it's safe? So I almost feel like there's some red, green, yellow to be had here in each of those buckets based on our best data that we have.
Brian, you're not off base at all. We've had
Can you tell I'm a consultant? Can you tell that?
I know, we've had that exact conversation. I see Nicole smiling really big because we have, and Megan, we have talked about that to nauseam, I think, and moving forward and how do we plan for that. And we've even said some of the plans on how we come back is all going to depend on what percentage of those parents will actually want to enter the building. And then we looked at the opposite problem, Ryan. If we have 80% of our families are like, we're coming back 5 days a week, can we really do that safely? And what does that look like? And then we're left with, how do we decide who comes in the building and who doesn't? So we're having those exact conversations, and that will all be part of our presentation the next time. And if anybody else in the committee wants to jump in, please feel free.
And it may look different for different grade levels.
It will.
For, you know, middle schoolers, their bodies are a lot bigger and the classrooms at upper campus are a lot smaller. So, you know, it may look different for elementary students and middle school students.
Yeah.
Rephrase the question a little bit. One of the things that we think is really important is that we have thought of all the things. We have really tried hard to sort of listen to what other people are saying and what other people are thinking. But what I don't want us to do is miss something that's really important. So if you didn't hear something that you feel is extremely important that needs to be implemented or thought about or considered that we did not mention, if you can state that so that we make sure that we didn't miss or overlook.
I have just a question. When we do surveys, sometimes I think we talked about this a lot with the equity surveys, where as long as there's a middle option, folks will choose the middle option and not seem to, make the hard decision on whatever the stay at home or go back. Like, you get a lot of hybrids because, that gives you kind of some flexibility. And I think for whoever kind of asked the question, good night, honey. Whoever asked the question about needing more, I guess, information, I think it is hard to choose, even though you're using kind of who has an appetite to come back. It is hard to even pick, say, hybrid, if you don't know, what you're sending your kid into for either 2 days a week or 1 day a week, or is it just a couple of days a week, or is it a month at a time? Like, no one knows, and what you choose for that could be very different depending on the details. And if you say, oh, well, I'm going to keep my kid at home, but then you find out that you'd have to get all new teachers or all new, or something like that, then that may totally flip, your appetite for wanting to bring them back. And so I know that it's almost kind of it's a chicken and the egg type situation. Like, you can't really plan for what hybrid will completely look like unless you know kind of how many more people will be in the building. But also, I don't know that parents could make, even on a survey, I know when I saw the survey, it's kind of hard to pick one when you don't know what either would look like, aside from the person who says, I don't care if you have bubbles for each kid, my kid's not leaving my front door. Well, there's that person. And then, there's the other person who says, well, they got to get out of here every day. So if you'll let them in, I'm gonna send them. But outside of that, the ones, the rest of us, our decisions are kind of based off of what you got and what you plan to do. And so I just would hope that when the next survey is issued, that there would be some kind of parameters to let people know what they're voting for. Would I vote for hybrid if that meant my kid was only going to school from 9 to 11? Well, yeah, no, that's not going to work. But would I do it if it was 2 full days a week? Well, possibly, so I don't know, but I don't know what your plan is for that next survey.
You are right, Monique. It is like a chicken or egg situation. And how does that work? We will be able to give a little bit more parameters for the November survey, but it will still not be as much as we'll have in December, but we will have all the information available when we need parents to make a decision for January. And once they make that decision, we're going to make them stick to that decision for a chunk of time and not go back and forth. And then once we have that decision, we're hoping the deadline to make the decision will be a week before we leave for winter break. So we have that week to really look at the data and see, is it possible with the amount of people that want to come back to do this? And if not, it gives us time to make adjustments that will be needed. So that's kind of where we are with that.
Christy, we do we know enough though to at least say, I'm thinking like there's like maybe 2 or 3 basics that would get us a long way, right? If we said, currently our best thinking is if we're hybrid, you're a Monday, Thursday, or a Tuesday, Friday from 8 to 2, or like not committing to it, but saying our best thinking based on what we've been talking about is that, and everybody's virtual Wednesday. Or are we just not even close enough to feel comfortable saying something like that?
No, and we said a little bit about that in the survey, the last survey, that hybrid would mean 2 days in the building,
right.
Half Monday, Tuesday, cleaning on Wednesday, and the other half Thursday, Friday. We are not looking at all at half-day models where you would come in the morning or in the afternoon. We're not looking at that model at all, knowing that most of our parents work outside the home.
Yeah.
And they need a whole day commitment. So that is one thing that we can take off the table, is the different times throughout the day.
Okay. It also doesn't make sense to try to clean the building between groups of students morning and afternoon.
Right.
or even from Monday to Tuesday and from Thursday to Friday.
So yeah, the grouping of Monday, Tuesday. Gotcha. Yep. I get it. I get it. Okay. And the other thing that that I wondered about would also be, I can imagine folks as they're trying to contemplate this is kind of a range of class size, because it is different if you say it's five kids in a room versus 12, 13, 14, then I think people are starting to change their mind a little bit. And so again, if we can reasonably say like that, it would be helpful, right? But if we actually don't, if we just don't feel like we can, then I understand that too. But I'm just thinking as a parent, those are some tipping points, some inflection points in decision making that if we could do the more we can do, the better, to a couple of.
Ryan, were you in our committee meetings? Because it's so funny. Like we had the two things you've asked are our two hot topics that we've talked about. It cracks me up.
I am everywhere. You just don't know it.
But we did. That was our main thing, is that we have to really figure out what that number is going to be in order to give parents accurate expectations of what that's going to look like.
Yeah. See, and this is now reminding me of all the minutia details that people don't think about, of like, well, how many tables are in a room and how many kids can sit at the table? And there's only desks in middle school. There's not tables. And how close are you willing to put those together? And like, you have to do some. Like,
Actually, there are tables and desks in middle school.
Yeah, so lots of math, lots
and middle
of
school
measuring
bodies
tape.
are much bigger.
Yeah,
So-
yes.
I think it's also one of the things to reassure people that we've been thinking about is that we're looking at each and every classroom, right? So how many kids can fit in this specific classroom? How many people can fit in this specific classroom? So it will be tailored to, that's why it's going to be different for everybody. So we are looking down to that level of minutia.
So 4-hour board meeting next month.
Possibly. I did want to address one thing that I saw in the chat box. They said, is it true the Globe is not prepared from a PPE standpoint? And that is not true. We have gotten, the organization just went right out of my head. Who sent that all to all the schools? GMA, was it GMA? The Senate? It just flew out of my head.
Denise
Anyway,
would know.
we got a whole shipment of PPE supplies from them, but also we as a school back in May decided that we knew we needed masks for staff, we needed face shields, we needed sanitation stations, we needed the water fountains redone. Like all of those things have already begun and started and been purchased, and we needed touchless thermometers for checking temperatures. So all those kind of things have already, the ball is already rolling.
All right. Any other questions from the board or recommendations for this hardworking committee? I don't know when these people sleep, but
Last question.
other committees.
Last question here. There was a comment earlier tonight, I think it followed one of my questions about the facilities. And the question was about, well, it seems like facilities committee is not meeting. And if there are facility needs for the building to get it ready for reopening, why isn't that happening? And my presumption would be that whatever facility needs that go with reopening, those are being addressed in the reopening committee, not necessarily in our facilities committee, because we typically wouldn't be covering in facilities that type of need. But I did want to make sure that kind of the same way you guys are addressing PPE, but any other, and you mentioned the water fountains and those types of facility needs, Chrissy, those are being addressed in the reopening committee, correct?
That is correct. We feel really fortunate that we have Jerry as a facilities director to kind of guide some of these things, which took a lot of, I don't know if pressure is the right word, off the facilities committee from the board. So the board facilities committee can stay at that high level and what they're looking at. And so most of everything that we're doing for getting ready to reopen is at the school level and making sure that we are ready.
And Christy, didn't we get several grants that are helping to cover some of these expenses? Like we're getting facilities grants for both campuses, almost 40,000 per campus. And then we also got a really large CARES Act grant that will help cover some of these PPE materials and other, technology issues or needs and that sort of thing.
You are correct about the 2 facilities grants. We were told that we had CARES Act money, but it is now being put on hold, but it's not put on hold from us or from our state, it's from a national level, sorting out differences between public and private schools. So there were some lawsuits filed and all that stuff. So we are sitting tight with that and hoping that that money will come through.
So in the meantime, what has the school purchased that, you were planning to use that money for?
So all of our extra Chromebooks and iPads that we purchased, that was going to be through CARES Act. Many of our online programs was going to be CARES Act. And a lot of the PPE things that we've already purchased, that was going to be through CARES Act money. So we are hoping that that will come through.
All right. Final questions, final opportunity.
I just want to jump in to thank Christy. She is doing a phenomenal job. This is not easy. It is so complicated. And I just really want to applaud Christy for leading this charge because it's a job, let me tell you.
Takes a team. It's a good team.
Thank you.
Takes a team.
What happened? Didn't there used to be little hand clap icons you could click on? I wanted to have some little hands come up there. Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate that. Absolutely. All right, so we're going to close out this discussion. We do not have any old or new business. We have only an executive session to go to. I sent you all a link a couple of hours or so beforehand and the document that we're going to look at. So we have one matter to discuss. So Christy, can you hold down the fort in this meeting? And we'll take Kevin with us and the board will hop over to exec session, then we'll come back when we're finished. Can I get a motion to move to executive session, please?
I move to motion to move to executive session.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?